Hi, I'm Dave Roberson. Welcome to the fourth installment of the RoseRyan OUM video series on getting ready for an IPO, what it's about. And today I'm going to talk about, or in this session, talk about what comes after the IPO. I think that's an important consideration we need to think about. So let's take a look at the slides. So I think what I want to do first is characterize what's different in being a private company and a public company. And these are just some of the key differentiators that I thought about when I pulled these remarks together. Let's talk about deadlines. You know, when you're a private company, your deadlines are internal. You don't have an external organization that you're having to report to on a timely basis. But when you become a public company, you have financials that have to be reported on time, SEC filings that have to be reported on time. So there's not much flexibility in terms of deadlines as a public company. Really, there's none. So learning how to deliver results, deliver guidance, do all these things on a very specific, non-flexible deadline, I think is something you need to get used to and is very different. Let's talk about the audit. We've already talked about getting ready to be public and the fact you need a PCAOB audit. As a private company, you don't need that. In fact, very few private companies will go through an entire PCAOB audit unless they have investors that insist on that. But it's a very different and very much more involved process that will be with you as long as you're a public company. So again, just getting used to working with external auditors and what that requires and doing it every year and working with them even on your quarterly results as you release those to the public. It's a very different process than what you're accustomed to. As a private company, your organization is more flexible and most of the hiring, most of the expense is spent on growth. What product development do we need? What sales development or investment do we need? What marketing investment do we need? And so that's where most of the resources of the organization go, is getting bigger, getting more profitable, gaining market share. But then when you become a public company, suddenly you have a lot of other things that become important. You need specialized skills like SEC reporting, investor relations. You probably need a more robust financial planning and analysis team to make sure your guidance is expressed correctly and explaining your business model to your investors. So there's a lot more that goes into being a public company that you just don't worry about or need to worry about as a private company. And that's not negotiable, right? You have to have those things in order to succeed as a public company. And one nice thing about the IPO process is it gives you the time to get ready for these things. And you can bring this team on as you need, but by the time you are public, you need to have that team in place and ready to function. There's a different accountability, and maybe this is not so different, but I think it is. Being accountable to investors is different than being accountable to shareholders. Investors in a private company, typically venture firms or large investors, they have a different set of parameters, and they're willing to look at a longer term view because they're looking to an exit when you do the IPO at some point in the future. Where your shareholders in the public environment, they want to know how you do every quarter. They want you to beat and raise your financial forecast every quarter. And it's a very different time horizon, and it's not as forgiving a set of accountabilities as your investors. If you miss a quarter with your investors, they may understand it and listen and so on, but it may not reduce the value of you as a company. You miss a quarter as a public company, the consequences can be much more severe in terms of your stock price. And then last, reporting, as a private company, you're ultimately reporting financials to the board, maybe quarterly, maybe monthly, but a very different reporting cadence and level of scrutiny and rigor that goes into the reporting. And I'm not saying sloppy reporting is acceptable in a private environment, but the level of reporting, the level of discipline, the level of audit and review of the reporting is governed by the SEC. So it's a very different level of intricacy, getting the accounting rules right, which are sometimes arcane and difficult to implement. So I think it's key to understand all these differences in being a public company, and most importantly, being ready to be a public company. We call it day two, the day after the IPO. So these are some of the big differences. Let's talk about one other topic, which is, what are your responsibilities as a new company, or as a newly public company, sorry. And I've mentioned a lot of these already, but one thing is you have to forecast guidance to the street, to the analyst community, to your shareholders, and getting that right, very, very important. Because if you don't do guidance properly, it will affect your stock price, and ultimately it can affect the CEO and the CFO's job tenure, if you will. If they miss guidance too many times, and that's measured in a very few, you may find a replacement coming in either of those roles. Are you ready for a public board? I've served on several public boards, and what the board requires in terms of support, in terms of information, reports, the committee work that happens, particularly the audit committee and the compensation committee. There's a lot of work. I used to get board decks sometimes before board meetings that were several hundred pages long. So that's several hundred pages that had to be prepared by that company 4 times a year, typically once for each quarter. So being ready, it's one thing to have shareholders, but now you're going to have a public board that has the fiduciary responsibilities that go along with that. And there's a lot of work that goes into keeping your board informed, reporting to the board, and providing the information they need to do their role correctly, the board as a whole, and then in particular the audit committee and compensation committee. There's a lot of work that goes into those two. Investor relations, again, very different. You have public shareholders, you have various analyst firms that will track the company. So what's your model? How do you explain that? How do you help them understand it and then value the company properly? Also with that, public relations, again, you're on a public stage now, so handling both investor and public relations are important. And I threw this last one in, I think it's important, Regulation FD, which is you can't say anything to one that you don't say to all. That's kind of the simple way I explain that regulation. But you can't be telling one shareholder something and not telling everyone else that same thing. Again, that's part of being a public company. And you don't want to make too many Reg FD mistakes, because then you make a special disclosure and it makes you look like you don't have good discipline in how you spread the information of the company. So I just mentioned all these things as you're going through your IPO journey. Make sure you're ready. And none of this is scary. It all can be done. Many, many companies do it every day, but there's a transition from private to public that I think is very important. And we at RoseRyan and OUM as well know how to help you navigate that and find your way into this new world as a public company. We've both helped many companies on this journey and are quite capable of helping you through any stage of any of the videos we've talked about in this series. So thank you so much for your time. If you have any questions you'd like to follow up with me personally or with OUM, we'll put all our information here at the end of the video. And we thank you for your time and attention over these 4 videos.
Thank you everyone for joining us on this video series about the IPO process. We hope you found it as interesting as we did. If you have any questions or concerns, please do reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you about them. Clara Fong, Dave Roberson, thank you for joining us today for this discussion and hope to hear from you.
Thanks so much, Doug. It was a real pleasure to join.
Thank you.